Hello, everyone. It's 1:04, so I guess we should get started. Welcome everyone to this Borderlines workshop. We are grateful that you are here. We have had more than 100 registrations. So I suspect people will be joining as we begin this panel. And I guess the number of registrants show how much interest there is in the topics we engage with. And it's fantastic to see this level of interest. My name is Mayra Ruiz Castro, and I am Director of Borderlines and Senior Lecturer at Queen Mary University. Today's session will be chaired by my colleague Isadora Cruchen. Isadora is a Senior Lecturer in Business, Politics and Development, also here at Queen Mary University, and she's also a member of Borderlines. And this workshop was really conceptualized by her together with her colleagues, building on the very important work they have done on activism monitoring of feminicide across different contexts. And without further ado, I will pass the baton to Isadora. Thank you all very much for joining us today, and thank you, Isadora, and all the speakers.
Thank you, Mayra. Hi, everyone. It's a real pleasure to have you all here today. I know other people might be joining us as we start this conversation. It's a real pleasure to organize this panel on data as resistance, feminist and trans interventions in data and AI. This panel brings together 3 presentations that explore feminist, trans, and participatory approaches to data, to media, and to technology. And there's a particular interest across these projects in working with activists and with civil society organizations towards more transformative and liberatory visions for data and for technology. So our first presentation will focus on data activism and participatory AI against feminicide. This draws on work from the Data Against Feminicide collaborative research project that is co-led by Catherine D'Ignazio. Unfortunately, Catherine couldn't be here with us, but the rest of the team is. Elena Suarez-Val, Silvana Fomega, and myself. The second presentation will be led by Yujie Gal, Harini Suresh, and Alessandra Youngs Almeida in collaboration with the Data Against Feminicide project. And we'll focus on a case study of participatory data annotation workshops that have been organized to explore how feminist AI can help to improve responsible media reporting on gender-based violence and feminicide in particular. And then finally, our third presentation will be led by Nico Stevens and Amelia Lee Dogan, and we'll focus on how trans-led and trans-serving organizations in the United States engage in restorative, transformative data science. And so this is actually based on an award-winning paper, so I'm really excited to have them present on this work. So before I move on, I want to thank Mayra and Fatima for creating space for us to organize this panel. It's a real pleasure to be able to share these projects with the Borderlines community. And thank you also for helping with the logistics for the event. Each presentation will have about 10 minutes, and then we'll have a broader Q&A at the end, but you're also welcome to place questions in the chat. In my experience of the seminars, people are very lively and active on the chat as well. A reminder that the session is being recorded. If you are uncomfortable with that, please let us know, and we'll find ways to make sure that you remain anonymous in your contributions and do not appear in the recording online. And since we only have about an hour, we're going to jump straight in with the presentation by Elena and Silvana representing the Data Against Feminicide project. I'll just briefly introduce them. Silvana is a researcher and practitioner working at the intersection of data governance, public policy, and digital technologies. She's the director of the Global Data Barometer, an international initiative that assesses the governance, availability, and use of data for the public good. And she's also a co-founder of Data Against Feminicide. Elena is a feminist researcher and anti-feminicide activist. She's the founder of Feminicidio Uruguay, an ongoing project that monitors and records gender-related violence against women, lethal gender-related violence against women. And she's also a co-founder of Data Against Feminicide. So over to you, Elena and Silvana, and thank you for presenting all this work.
Thank you so much, Isa. Elena will be sharing the slides for the both of us. I'll start with the first few minutes, and then Elena will follow up with the different explanations about the tools. But first of all, once again, thank you for the organization of this conversation. I'm very much looking forward to the other presentations and to learn from the people in the audience as well. As Isa mentioned, I'm Silvana Fumega. I'm one of the co-founders of Data Against Feminicide. And I'm going to start talking a little bit about our initiative. And to start from the beginning, I'll begin with the concept of feminicide that I'm sure all of you know, but just in case, we are talking about the killing of women because of the gender. And this is not just a single act of violence, it's part of a broader system. And for many years, these killings were minimized. They were used in terms, for example, as crimes of passions and other terms in the media and other places where the language hides responsibility. It makes the problem seem individual, personal, instead of structural. So in that sense, feminist researchers, civil society groups, journalists, and international organizations have worked hard to change this narrative. And they have helped reframe feminicide as a public issue, one that requires state action and accountability. But naming the problem is not enough. Even in countries where femicide or feminicide is recognized by law, there are still serious gaps in the data. Cases are missing, data is incomplete, definitions are inconsistent. And these gaps are not random. They reflect political choices, institutional limits, and a lack of commitment to accountability. So the question there is, what happened with these gaps, with the missing data? And that's where others begin to step in. And if we move to the other slide, thank you, Elena. Across Latin America and beyond, many civil society and grassroots movements have stepped in. They documented cases, they supported families, they demanded justice, but something important has changed in the last decade. We now live in a world where data matters more than ever. Data shapes what is visible, what is recognized, and what gets attention. And in that sense, feminist movements have taken up these tools. In the context of many social movements, like, for example, Ni Una Menos, no more than, no, how would it be the translation? No one less, in Argentina and in many other Latin American countries and Spain. Activists did not only mobilize in the street, they also started to produce their own data. They have created what we call counter data that challenges or complement official numbers and tells a different story. This helps explain why so many initiatives, and we see it there, have emerged in the past few years. We have identified more than 190 civil society projects around the world working on this data. And this is not a coincidence. It shows a shift. Data becomes part of the collective action. But this process depends on resources, skills, and time. And it often as well places a heavy burden on the people doing the work. So in this context, and we move to the next one. Thank you. Data Against Feminicide started not as an initiative, project, or organization, but as a conversation. As Isa mentioned a little bit, in 2019, I connected with Catherine Ignacio and Elena Suarez-Val here, and also later Isadora joined us, and we share a common concern, the way femicide or feminicide is counted or not counted. And this way of addressing the topic is not neutral. We kept seeing the same issue, missing data, fragmented categories, and at the same time, we saw many people already doing this work, often manually, often with very few resources, but with a strong commitment. So Data Against Feminicide grew from that tension, not to replace this work, but to support it. And in that sense, from the beginning, we made a clear choice. We do not collect data ourselves. Instead, we support those groups and activists who already do. We focus on supporting a community of practice, a space where activists, researchers, journalists, and technologists can connect and learn from each other. And because its work is not only technical, it's also emotional, and it can be isolating. People are working with cases of violence, often without any institutional support. So in that sense, community matters, not only to improve method, but to sustain the people doing the work. Our task in that sense focuses on three main areas. We support a global community of practice, we co-design tools to help them do their work, and we do some research about these practices through a feminist participatory approach. In that sense, we co-design tools with communities, we learn from these practices, and we do research with them, not about them. Because this is not just about having better data, it's about shifting power and supporting visibility, accountability, and justice. And just to finish these initial slides, alongside this work, we have developed several reports and publications, which you can find in our website. It's there in the slide, and also we can share with you later. And in this research, we place a strong emphasis on the use of a feminist participatory approach. We work closely with the people who produce this data. We listen to their experience, and we reflect together on their method, challenges, and needs. This allows us not only to document what is out there, as you saw in the other slide, but also strengthen these practices over time. I'm gonna stop here and then leave the floor to Elena to share more about the practices and the design of the tools with this approach. Elena, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Silvana. Well, and thank you again for the invitation. So just to give you a flavor of the kind of actions that we've undertaken over the last 6 years in the Data Against Feminicide project, I wanted to begin by showing you this really messy slide, which is made up of the flyers, the e-flyers that we created for each of our community events. So as Silvana mentioned, we started in 2020 with a gathering in November, where we expected maybe 100 people to turn up, and then 500 people turned up. And that was a very solid confirmation of our intuition that there were already a lot of people doing this work and interested in this work. And ever since, we have held events every November in commemoration of the International Day for the Eradication of Violence Against Women, which is on 25th of November. And we've had that kind of participation year on year, and it never ceases to amaze us that there's always new people and more people that are interested in this work and in the ramifications. You know, as Silvana said, gathering together is a way to create community, and several projects that are beyond us and that have no relation to Data Against Feminicide have been born out of participating in these community events. And we have tackled in each event themes that are related to our own concerns from the research that we have been doing. So we are trying to always respond to the key issues that we're seeing activists are thinking about and raising in their own work with feminicide and with data. And so we looked at the media, we looked at AI most recently, we've also looked at data visualization and art. And all of this information you can find on our website. So the recordings from each of these events is on, they're available on our website as well. So how do we know about these concerns that activists are raising? Well, beyond the community events, we have conducted qualitative international research with groups around the world. We've interviewed over 75. We've done over 75 interviews with groups and individuals in 18 countries, and we have produced out of this research have come out several publications, but also everything feeds into everything else. So they inform the kind of events that we will be holding, and also most importantly, they inform the kind of supports that we offer to groups doing data. Using data to combat gender-related violence through technology. So, as Silvana mentioned, the kind of third angle of our project is technology development. And in that sense, we have developed two tools. One is an improved version of Google Alerts. It's tailored to the requirements of feminicide data activists. I myself create data for Uruguay, and so we noticed many activists were using Google Alerts, but there were receiving too much information. There were it was not precise, and it involved, as a result, the reading of information about violence that was not necessarily related to feminicide. So we created this tool to slightly lighten the load, and it uses a machine learning algorithm to detect the likelihood that an article may be related to feminicide or not. And the other tool we created, which you can see on the bottom image in the screen, is a highlighter. And what that does is when activists are reading a news article, it will highlight the information that we have found is most commonly collected by activists. So for example, proper names, ages, locations, and we have offered also the ability to add keywords. So some activists who are looking for specific information, so for example, judiciary process or other types of specific information, they can put in keywords to select that information. And all of this didn't come out of our own top-down kind of decision making. On the contrary, it's all being co-designed with activists themselves, ourselves. I have the two hats as an activist and a co-lead in the project, and so we have found that, as well as creating these tools are not only useful, and activists have reported that they're useful in the sense that they have lowered the emotional labor that they're exposed to in reading about violence, or they have facilitated some of the processes, but they also help to generate a community of practice around the tools themselves that also creates connections. So for example, we have WhatsApp groups where all the users of the tools participate and exchange information. And just finishing now, I wanted to highlight the latest project that we're working on, which is also a co-design project, and we are working with Yuja and Harini. They will talk in more depth about it, so I'm just going to mention it briefly. It's a project looking at what potential could artificial intelligence have to support better reporting on media reporting on feminicide, because out of all the conversations with activists, we have found that deficient reporting of feminicide is a concern, and it really affects the quality of data that can be made available. So I'll just finish up with some insights, tensions, and ongoing reflections, which I've stolen completely from Isa. But I think it's important to kind of always leave the questions open there for the Q&A later on. But we have these tools that are being in use by many people and many groups across different countries. One tension there is what happens with customer support, if you want to call it that. What happens with the sustainability of these tools that are based in academia? How can academia continue to support long term when we lack funding, etc., etc. Another question that has been raised and continues to kind of linger is the possibility of creating technological tools when concepts are politically changing. So, for example, the term feminicide is differently defined in different geographies, in different countries. Can we build a tool that can work across these differences without erasing them, but on the contrary, mobilizing those differences? So, for example, in the annotation process, Yuja and Harini will talk more about this. How do we annotate things, maintaining difference rather than trying to find an unhappy consensus? And the final one would be this problem of decentralizing technical know-how. So a lot of the co-design processes that we've carried through have been more on the design and idea side, where the technological development is done elsewhere. And we're really looking into kind of how can we move from that? What does it mean to share the actual coding, the actual infrastructural part? And so this is just a quick show of our team and collaborators, which are many, and of course all the incredible activists that have been participating in our project through the 6 years. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Elena and Silvana. If you have any questions, thank you. I know lots of people have joined us since this first presentation began. If you have any questions, you can paste in the chat, and we'll have a broader Q&A after the next two presentations. So now we're going to move on to a project called Reimagining Data Work that's based on a broader project called Media Narratives, Feminicide Media Narratives and AI. The team that will be presenting is composed by Yuja Gao. Yuja is a PhD student in computer science at Brown University. Her research focuses on understanding the societal impacts of AI systems through a social technical perspective. Yuja is advised by Dr. Harini Suresh, who is also part of the team that will present. Harini is an assistant professor of computer science at Brown University, and she leads the Data in Society collective, the DISCO Lab, which studies how to support individual and collective agency in technology design, use, and refusal. And then we have Alessandra Youngs de Almeida. Alessandra is a Brazilian researcher, professor, and feminist whose work focuses on social and reproductive rights and gender-related violence in Latin America. She's currently an adjunct professor, faculty member in the Department of Politics and Policy at Simmons University, and she's also a research affiliate with the Data plus Feminism Lab at MIT. So with that, over to you, Yuja and team.
Yeah, thank you, Isa, for the introduction. I'll be sharing the slides and I'll be doing the presentation for our project. And then actually most of our team is here, so everyone will be able to jump in for questions for the Q&A. Give me 1 sec to share the slides. Sorry, wrong tab here. Yeah, while I'm sharing the slides, thank you, Savannah and Elena, for the great presentation on data against feminicide. And it has been a real honor since my PhD to be able to work with this amazing community to do community-based research and thinking about the possibility of feminist AI and data work. So, okay, here is the slide. And thank you for the presentation for introducing a lot of the backgrounds on like feminicide and data activism, which is the key motivations for our project. So here it is. Can you all see the slides okay? Great. Perfect. So yeah, I'll be presenting our work, Reimagine Data Work, Participatory Annotation Workshops as Feminist Practice. This project explores how data work for AI development itself can be an act of collective dialogue, resistance, and solidarity building. This is a collaboration with Isa, Elena, Alessandra, Catherine, and Harini. Most of them are in this call, as well as a broader collaboration with the Data Against Feminicide project. So I'll start by some backgrounds and context for this project. So as Savannah also talked about, media coverage for feminicide and gender-based violence is the main way that this culture and is understood and circulated by the people. So media coverage can frame gender-based violence or feminicide or femicide as a structural problem to support search for justice and act as a source of data for data activists to produce counter data. However, when these cases contain harmful practices, they can also re-victimize survivors and families, obscure structural causes, reinforce discrimination, and contribute to greater state negligence. In fact, these are all broader issues that the Data Against Feminicide community has been observing while they have been working with these data sources. So as Elena mentioned, the community has been keen in exploring the potential of technologies to support their work. And in fact, there has been success with applying machine learning or AI-based systems to support data activism. So a natural follow-up question that the community is also very interested in is whether an AI tool could serve as either a pedagogical or editorial tool to support more responsible reporting of these cases. So we have actually a good really starting point. There have been existing best practice guides at both international and local level to guide the reporting of these cases. So one natural extension of those might be having a tool that maybe automatically detect these practices and potentially suggest edits to make them more feminist and responsible. However, when we take a closer look at these best practice guides, we quickly realize that what counts as good or bad reporting actually is very culturally specific. So, for example, on the right, I have some good and bad practices that are generally universal, but there are also other practices, for example, naming the victim, that can be humanizing in some contexts, but really a cultural violation or even a taboo in other contexts. So this shows that this domain requires a lot of deep contextual knowledge that is possessed by the activists, journalists, and researchers that are really been working on this domain from a daily life. So in our project seeks to produce a taxonomy and a data set that builds on the best practice guides, but really captures the deep contextual knowledges of what is good and bad practices in different contexts, and then apply this taxonomy to annotated data sets where the domain experts would apply these taxonomy labels to actual news articles to identify good and bad practices in journalism. So while we produce this data set, we in parallel ask a methodological question to see if it is possible to reimagine data work or annotation specifically as a set of co-constructed knowledge, community care, and resistance against exploitative work practices. So to explore this question, we turn to workshops at the methodology. Drawing on a long history of creating feminist spaces, from Latin America feminist encuentros that started in the 1980s to more recent feminist hackathons in HCI, workshops have served as sites for community building, collective action, and resistance. And we wanted to bring this tradition into data annotation to design spaces for collective dialogue, collaboration, in contrast to the isolated labor of typical annotation pipelines. So we organized in total of 3 participatory data workshops in English, Spanish, and Portuguese, with the participation from 79 journalists, activists, and researchers joining from 35 countries. So in these workshops, participants collectively read and annotate news articles for journalistic practices, discussing how they might manifest differently in different cultural contexts. Through these discussions, they also co-construct the taxonomy itself to negotiate what categories to include, propose new categories, and debating on what the boundaries should be. Additionally, participants also critically brainstormed and co-designed possible technological interventions that could be built from this data, as well as thinking about the potential risks of applying AI to this domain. After the workshops, some participants continued working with us to create a larger data set asynchronously, and we facilitated online and offline spaces to foster collaboration and communal care. So throughout this whole process, we've identified several takeaways of applying feminist ideals into data work, as well as some tensions and recommendations for future studies. So I'll highlight 3 here. So the first is what we call to reflect about the participation throughout this process. So in standard annotation pipelines, annotators have very little control over the data or the AI systems that would get built. Their only role is to apply labels to a data set that is produced by others, and then that is eventually trained on AI systems that has been decided by other peoples, usually privileged institutions or corporations. In our workshops, in contrast, participants took on many roles. They would co-construct the taxonomies, curate the data by contributing articles from their own regions, brainstorming future use of data, and some participants also facilitated workshop sessions and analyzed disagreements in the data sets. In our process, data annotation turned out to be not a single task, but many interdependent knowledge construction processes. But one important takeaway that we have from this is more participation and more stages is not necessarily better. In our project, annotating violence is an emotionally demanding process. Not everyone has the capacity to be deeply involved at every stage. So we highlight the importance of facilitating multiple depth of dialogue to provide opportunities for involvement at different layers while preserving participants' agency to determine their own level of involvement, which may shift over time. And next, I wanted to highlight a reflection that came from applying one of the guiding principles of feminist practice, which is to consider context and pluralism. You might assume that this would mean the more perspectives is always better. But our process really showed that pluralism without boundaries can actually work against our goals. So in our Spanish language workshops, participants mostly came from Latin America. These shared cultural and historical reference points enabled productive deliberation to building a working agreements while preserving regional specificity. In contrast, in our English workshops, participants came from Nepal to Kenya to the US. While discussions surfaced rich cross-cultural differences, the contexts were so varied that it was really difficult to ground them in a shared framework or practical agreements. English as a lingua franca enabled what we call too much diversity, subverting the goal of cultural specificity. Our tensions faced in the process between deep, rich contextual knowledge and requirement from some standardization in AI development, in our case, shared categories in taxonomy. So we propose a concept called tactical consensus, which is the idea of reaching a practical agreement that's collectively negotiated that meets the structural requirements for specific contexts without flattening these cultural differences. And lastly, I wanted to reflect on how the concept of AI development shifted over time. So as I mentioned earlier, this project started with an optimistic outlook in building an AI system to support responsible journalism. But the deeper we engaged with this domain with experts, the clearer it became that all the complex cultural nuances, contextual knowledge, institutional and structural constraints were really hard to be packed into a single AI system. Instead, AI development was used as a guide, or what we call a heuristic device, to facilitate community and capacity building and critical reflection on journalism and AI use, which became goals in and of themselves. And this project turned into actually many decentralized exploration of AI and data. That's many of them are initiated by our participants. As one participant put it very beautifully, that the process of producing data and prototyping AI tools served as educational opportunity to critically engage with reporting practices such that an AI system may ultimately be unnecessary. And we just wanted to build on that beautiful quote and ask the broader question, what would it look like for AI development process to decenter the inevitability of AI? So just to close this presentation, our work shows that participatory data practices can make space for collective dialogue, understanding situated complexities of this task, and imagining alternative for roles of AI or not AI at all. And we highlight some tensions and insights in trying to enact feminist principles in data and AI work and highlighting tensions of the relational and care work that is in fundamental contradiction with the focus on scale and standardization in traditional data and AI work. And for our next steps, we're really excited to continue experimenting with potential AI systems that are facilitated by the data we collected, and we'll continue to co-design and brainstorm with our participants in what this AI could be, whether to be an AI system or not. And lastly, I wanted to thank our participants that make our work possible. And I have a QR code for a paper where we have more in-depth discussions of more reflections we had, of course, during this process. And I'll also share a link to the paper in the chat if you're interested. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Yuja. Yeah, great timing as well. All right. So before we can open up for the broader conversation, we'll have Nico Stevens and Amelia Lee Dogan present on their project on trans activist transformative data science. So Nico Stevens is an assistant professor of statistical and data sciences at Smith College, where they direct the data infrastructures group. They're currently completing their first monograph, Abolitionist Engineering, which puts contemporary software engineering in conversation with present abolitionist movements. And Amelia Lee Dogan is a PhD candidate at the University of Washington, researching how data systems and tools can be used for co-liberation. Amelia is also a research affiliate with the Data plus Feminism Lab at MIT. I believe Amelia will start. So over to you.
Okay. Okay. Theoretically, my screen is sharing right now. Is that correct? Okay. Thank you so much. So hi, I'm Amelia, and I'll be leading this presentation, and we'll also hear a little bit from Nico. I want to keep this short and sweet because I know we're almost at time. I will be talking about how we interviewed trans activists in the US at trans-led and trans-serving organizations and how they practice data science in their everyday activism. I will be talking today about sexual violence, murder, and transphobia. If those are topics that you would rather not engage with today, please take care of yourself. Feel free to mute me, and yeah. So first, I wanted to introduce how I was introduced to trans data as a young person. It was this list that the Human Rights Campaign puts out every year of the numbers of lives lost to trans violence in the US every year. A big part of this list is having names to say at Trans Day of Remembrance each year, yet focusing on these deaths often reinforces negative framings. As we've seen in the other presentations today, feminicidio and other gender-based violence is a really heavy topic. And a lot of research about technology and LGBTQ communities focuses on social stigma, marginalization, and harm. Our project really wanted to reframe this and think about what Schuster and Westberg term a joy deficit in trans research. Following this logic, we just didn't want to focus on what is sometimes called the trans necropolitics of data, but rather we wanted to understand what trans activists were already doing. As trans activist B. Parker reminds us, give us our roses while we're still here. We wanted to focus on the living. And so we wanted to frame this study as a celebration of trans activists' brilliance and continued to work to serve and care for this. And now I'll pass it to Nikos to sort of talk about what we did during the study.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you for all your work organizing this event. So as Amelia said, our focus was on, living, thriving trans people and their practices. So I reached out to 67 organizations, inviting them to kind of co-create this knowledge with us and acknowledging the immense power imbalance between me and Amelia, researchers at MIT and University of Washington, and folks working in the field, sometimes for no money at all. And we had a lot of organizations push back and decline to participate. And I really appreciated being in community with them. We had other people reach out, being willing to participate, but wanting more money, right? And we did our best. I think in every case, we were able to get them more money. And some people wanted, rather than to be paid, to have money donated to organizations. So we reached out to 67. We ended up talking to 16 people in 13 sessions. And, we recorded those and we set out to do a rather standard grounded theory, inductive coding process, trying to let themes emerge. And one of the things that we did, Amelia and I and Catherine and other folks who we were in conversation with, is we let ourselves disagree with each other, right? We had trans participants offering us different interpretations of how they're thinking about data, how they're thinking about their work. And we, as trans people on the team, had different interpretations of what they were saying. And so I was really happy to hear Yuja talk about plurality. And it was one of the things that we really emphasized, even in not just the interview, but also the coding and the interpretation process. And I'll hand it back to Amelia for whatever I missed.
Yeah, great. And I think during this coding process and thinking about this project, we also wanted to bring in some of the wonderful work that we've learned from the Data Against Feminicide project around how activists think about data and use data in a process that's called restorative and transformative data science that includes approaches from restorative justice that emphasize healing and harm reductions about making communities and lives whole. And so using that, we thought about sort of the theoretical framework that has emerged from some of the larger Data Against Feminicide project of the iterative cycle of using data, researching the data's context, recording the data, and making decisions on how to both use and refuse data. And these 4 steps are sort of like laid out more broadly in Catherine D'Ignazio's book, and this wonderful image by Melissa Q. Tang. And so I'm sort of going to just talk you briefly through these 4 steps using 2 of our research participants for context. So first is this idea of resolving data. And here I'm talking about Elle, who's an executive director of a state-level trans-led and trans-serving organization on the East Coast as the US. So Elle told us that they moved back to their state after some time in New York City, and I wasn't finding what I needed. I was having the same conversation with some other folks I was connected to. So after really hoping that I could just help out somewhere, an org was born. So this process is what Elle describes thinking about what the trans needs in their state were. Elle would go sit at local LGBTQ plus events and would be sitting at a table with a trans flag and talking to people and being like, what's going on in this life? So this was sort of the research process of becoming an activist and doing other things. Elle also became an expert in state-level name changes through their lived experience of helping dozens of people change their name in their state. And they became an expert on the practicalities of this name change process so much that they would contest what judges would say about the process, because often they don't have that lived experience and that research process. And next, I'll be talking about N. N corresponds with many incarcerated people, the majority of whom are trans. So like in this figure, you can see a dashboard that she built keeping track of all of these letters. Many of these letters are about sexual violence that incarcerated people experience in the prison system, and Elle works through correspondence to record data from these letters that fit into the descriptions of violence under the Prison Rape Elimination Act through collecting this data and uses it to advocate for reform and to use this data. In fact, N started writing a report about Prison Rape Elimination Act violations in their state prisons because, as she described, state senators wound up refusing to invite me to their interim session on these issues. And I take that as a compliment, that they didn't want to hear from us. So since they refused to do that, I turned this work into this report. For more examples of how trans activists use data in similar ways and different ways than some of the Feminicidio activists we've heard about, I hope you read our paper. We also, from this paper, develop what we call a research and a design agenda about how trans data and trans data practices can inform future development of trans data, including that trans data is about materially improving lives. Data activism and data advocacy loses its meaning if it fails to expand our community's life chances, as Dean Spade would say. Second, trans data crosses boundaries. Using feminist and queer approaches to data, how can we think about trying to shift and cross over boundaries that is integral to the trans experience? Lastly, trans data requires constant power analysis, especially in the deepening transphobic context in the United States. So thinking about power is essential to all activist works. We see these pillars of trans data as a way to guide new data collection, analysis, and communication systems. And we detail more design implications of this in our paper. And I'll put a link to the paper in the chat, and you feel free to email me or Nico for more questions. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amelia and Nico. Really excited to learn more about this project and the paper as well. So now we have about 15 minutes for a Q&A. We're really excited to hear your thoughts, your questions on the projects. Maida, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? I see you
yes,
posted
of
one
course.
on the chat.
I just just entered in the, yes, anyway. Thank you all for the fantastic presentations. I'm really amazed by the work you do. Your commitment, it's truly valuable and admirable, and that's why I had this question in my mind as I heard you speaking, and I was thinking that the systematic tracking and the appropriate reporting of gender-based violence should be the responsibility of institutions, of governments, right? Without considering that it shouldn't have to exist in the first place. But and I think what you have presented today highlights that this is not always the case, of course, and that activists, it feels to me at least that activists are carrying this responsibility, shouldering much of this work. And so my question is, do you engage with those institutions that are responsible, to prevent, also to prosecute gender violence, based violence? And if you engage with them, what has been the reaction? Do you get any support from them? Do you engage productively with them? I'm just very curious to know about this. Thank you so much.
I can start if you want. I'm not sure. Oh, Elena, you want?
Yeah, I was gonna ask if are you gonna take a few questions or we just answer them one by one?
Do we have any other hands raised? Anyone else that wants to add a question, or maybe take that one and then we'll come back to the audience.
Do you want me to say something first? And I'm going to start with some of the work that led to the beginning of Data Against Feminicide. I used to work in an organization, and we were working on data standardization with public officials in different countries in Latin America. And one of the things that we were seeing at that time, and I'm sure it's the same today, is that there were, in many cases, people working there with not many resources, with not many support, that they were doing the daily work of collecting the data from the judiciary, from the police and other organizations inside statistical offices or some other parts of government. And in many cases, they were suffering the same problems that we see later in activists, that they were like some way forgotten about the work they were doing. They were having a lot of emotional burden and not many resources. And in some cases, we see a crossover between people working in civil society and then working in public organizations and so on. So in that sense, I mean, it was not that different in the case of the daily work, but it's true that overall, I mean, if we are looking at the big pictures, civil society organizations and activists were doing the work that in many cases public organizations were not doing. So in that case, in some cases, in the best case scenario, they were complementing each other. In some other cases, they were just doing the work that the state was not doing in a particular country. I don't know, Elena, if you want to add something to that.
Yeah, I guess just to emphasize that point, that even within the state, there are bodies that are doing this work, and so what's lacking is higher up, right? So the will in individuals is there, but the structural conditions for this work to happen or to happen well, because it is happening, are often not there. But I also wanted to add the kind of flip side is that we had a lot of discussions when we were using the idea of missing data and counter data from the data feminism conceptual palette, because we realized that that counter position in some cases gives the impression that activists might only be doing data collection or data production in contraposition of the state, so that as if the only motivation were to counter the state inaction, and that's not always the case. It is sometimes the case, but it's not the only motivation for these projects to begin. In the case of Feminicide in particular, memorialization is quite a big motivation. So a lot of the databases are memorials, not just data. So I guess I bring that up because it's interesting sometimes to think about what we're doing with the concepts and what kind of things they might evoke that are not really there. But yeah, to your question, there needs to be a lot more, and Isa could maybe talk a lot more, but we are developing this year our key objective is to introduce more policymakers into our work.
Well, I'll move on with other questions, so happy to come back to this point later if there's time. So Manjiri, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Hi. I'm Manjiri Gokhale Joshi. I'm a first-year PhD student at QML, and my research is going to be on leadership and inclusion and representation of disabled people, especially persons with disabilities, in leadership roles. Though I'm very, very interested in your subject and what you've been talking about today, both because gender as well as identification. So my question is about intersectionality, and if you have any pointers, anything I could study or look at that, because what I've discovered along the way is that there is so little research available in disability and representation in leadership roles. And it is, of course, much, much better in gender, and it's much better in even the LGBTQI plus space, much better. Not greatly better, but a little better. So if there is anything you can point me towards or, engage with you, I'd be really happy to join the conversation.
Thank you, Manjiri. Does anyone want to take that on intersectionality and like disability studies as well as they relate to some of the things we've been talking about? I believe we had somebody in the Data Plus Feminism Lab that worked with Catherine that worked on disability specifically. I think she would be a wonderful reference. Nico's Manjiri, Nico's dropping some links on the chat. Alessandra, do you recall her name? The student that worked on this. Okay, we're gonna look into this and then bring it back to you, Manjiri.
Sure. Thank you.
I do remember it. It's Natasha, of course. I don't know how I forgot it actually. It's Natasha Ansari. She's still working on it. I send you her links about her here in the chat.
Yeah, I think Natasha is the person that comes to mind. I know she was doing really wonderful work on this. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We also just to on the intersectionality aspect, Manjiri, like we in the previous paper and project and like a sub-project within the larger Data Against Feminicide project, we did work on a paper that was led by Harini that tried to explore like this question of intersectionality in the construction of AI systems, like the email alert system that Elena talked about. One of the things that we had noticed is that it tended to work a lot better for activists that were monitoring all types of feminicides or were monitoring feminicides at a really large scale. But it didn't work as well for activists that monitored very specific types of feminicide that were quite intersectional. So, for example, police killings of Black women in the United States or murders of Indigenous women and girls. And yeah, Elena just put that paper on the chat. So there is quite a bit on intersectionality in that paper as well. I don't know, Harini, if you want to add anything. But...
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the interesting findings from that paper was like with the groups that are monitoring more intersectional violence, there's both like the need to build like different kinds of tools, so like different models that are more tailored to that context, and like we worked with those groups to like collect more data and like really define this specific intersectional context. But also there were these like layered harms in the production of the news articles themselves. So for like the groups monitoring missing and murdered Indigenous women, like many times the articles didn't exist themselves. So we like built specific models for that, but those cases were just not reported on as often. And so there was only so much that like better data or better models could do, because there were these like upstream issues in the production of like the media ecosystem itself. So that was just another thing that came out of that.
Thank you. Thank you. On a completely different note, before I, just go on, in case anyone is interested, I have recently done an interview with India's first trans person to be on a Supreme Court panel, and so it's available on LinkedIn and everywhere else. I'm happy to send it out. So it's a good 35-minute interview, and really from sex work to begging to having a really difficult life to where the person is today is quite incredible to see that. In case anyone's interested, I'd be happy to share that.
Thanks, Manjari. Yeah, definitely share it.
Yes. Thank you.
Do we have other questions, other hands? I did have one.
Sorry.
Go on. I think it's Sarah. Yeah, go on, Sarah.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you very much for the presentations. I found everything super excited. And I just want to hear a little bit more, if possible, about how your ideas to approach the media itself, journalists, and how to involve their own production of news related to feminism and all kinds of violence in the project, if you have some thoughts about that.
We have a lot of thoughts about we're working on it. I mean, we did a really big push to include journalists in the data annotation project, meaning most of the community of practice that come to our events are activists and actually not policymakers, but people in government, and journalists, right? But journalists were not that big. It's mostly activists, academics, and that's the kind of profile. And so we did a lot of work to reach out to international associations and so on, and we did get more journalists participating. But we kind of think for the next stage, for the development of a model, if we want to, we would like to explore that direction. But it only really makes sense to do it for and with somebody specific. It can be done for the whole world of journalism, and so we're trying to think about ways in which we can find a partner for that, somebody who will be interested in working with that. And then the other thing, we may be piling on too many things, too many expectations onto the same problem, because we're also thinking about devolving some of the technological developments. So at the same time, we're thinking about creating a partnership with a technological partner in South America. Anyway, all work in progress. But for now, what we'd like to do and what we're working on is to publish the annotated articles and the annotated and the taxonomy that we've been working on, because we believe, as Yusha commented, for the participants in the annotation process, that was already a really deep learning experience. And so we think it can be a really useful pedagogical tool. So a lot of these good practice guides, they offer some examples, but we think having annotated articles, like this is good, this is bad, with explanations of how we arrived at a process that gives more meat to some of these good practice guides that are already circulating, already really good and deep. So we're working on that for now.
Not sure if anybody wants to add anything to that. If I may take it, we have 1 minute technically, but I did want to ask a question to Amelia and Nico. I was really interested in when you were describing your data analysis process for the interviews that you allowed yourselves to disagree. And I wanted to just learn a bit more about what that looked like and how we materialized in the paper, when you're writing about it, how did you incorporate those disagreements? Thank you.
I mean, I'd like to hear from Amelia, but I think one of the ways we did it is by writing 2 papers. I mean, really, right? Is I was I see an epistemological thread. And so Amelia assisted on that one, and then Amelia wrote the other. But please.
Yeah, I think that is like definitely one way. Like I write for a more computer sciencey audience, and I think the epistemology was like a very different paper than what we wrote. I think the one example we give in the paper is that we disagreed on our we were coding a passage about a participant's data workflow and whether or not we wanted to code that with like data friction, internal organizational processes, and or a reason for collecting data. And I think I remember like Nico and I were like memoing, which is a process in qualitative research where you often do a lot of reflexivity, and we just weren't reaching agreement during our meetings. So I think this was something where like we allowed multiple codes, and I think through reflexivity and like a trans feminist commitment, like we were able to like materialize that. And I think that is actually one of the more interesting things that come from this paper that is maybe transferable to like research that is not at all about trans people or trans activists.
Super interesting. Thank you so much. I guess we'll wrap up. Thank you so much, everyone, to all the presenters, all the panelists. Thanks for everybody that joined us today. And thank you to Maida and Borderlines for creating space for this presentations and conversation. Thank you all. Bye-bye.